Hello, TDU world, and welcome to our first, I guess, Wednesday night Facebook session. And tonight we're going to be talking to Vadim Turchin, and he is just to give you a little background on him. I've been working with Vadim for a couple years now at TDU. He taught some classes with us, some photoreal lighting courses, starting about 4 years ago. And then when we revamped TDU, Jasmine and I created courses, and we are very, very glad to bring Vadim back to teach some more photoreal lighting courses, which we're going to be unleashing this year upon you. But the first things first, we wanted everyone to get a chance to get to know him a little bit, get to know his past, get to know where he's coming from, get to know why he got into lighting in the first place, and what some of his inspirations are. So Vadim, I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit. Well, I'll say it. Vadim has been working in this industry for how long now? 75, 80 years?
80 years. It's actually 20 years in May.
Mm-hmm. And you've worked for a bunch of different companies, right? You've worked for
I worked for a bunch of companies. Like I worked for a company called PSYOP, Mill, Brand New School, Curious Pictures. I directed a TV show for Disney Junior Channel. I've done a bunch of things. I worked on films, commercials, lots of television. I used to work for Showtime. Now I work with MPC, where I'm a visual effects supervisor, as well as the project lead, and essentially responsible for setting up the project, overseeing the overall quality, and mostly look development and lighting setup, plus mentoring within MPC. And for those of you guys who don't know, MPC is a company who did Jungle Book. We're working on Dumbo right now, and we did Blade Runner last year, so we won 3 Oscars in a row, actually. I had nothing to do with it. Just I'm taking credit for something that I have nothing to do with. But I do work with those people, and I use those teams, and particularly a team that worked on Jungle Book, a lot of sort of attention to detail and quality that we try to adhere to and hopefully translate into this class in photorealism, comes from being exposed to those different backgrounds and different environments. I have to admit, I started as a character animator, so a lot of my background is actually, it started as a character animation, and then I would say 20 years ago, I actually interviewed at Blue Sky to be like a layout animator. That didn't go very far. That was like, came to a dead end pretty quickly. I had one interview.
And just so you guys know, 20 years ago, Blue Sky wasn't making movies. We were doing commercials and stuff.
Yeah, they were doing like Braun.
No Ice Age or anything like that. It was they were doing like the Fish in the Soprano series and things.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. That was famous.
Okay, well let's get into your past a little bit. Let's talk about how you got into this. So let's start even further back. So well, first off, where are you from? Tell us a little bit about your.
Sure. I grew up in former Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. Actually, what's now is Ukraine. I immigrated in late 80s. I actually have a degree in organic chemistry. I was a pre-med. I actually did biomedical research for 3 years at Harvard Institute of Medicine, and then I decided that it wasn't for me, and I went to Vancouver Film School, where I got a degree in character animation.
Very cool.
From that on, I sort of stayed in Boston. I worked for a stop motion company, actually, and about 3 years into it, I became more interested in kind of more aesthetics of the entire shot. So as much as I still love animation and I directed occasionally, mm-hmm. I shifted more into visual aspects of the scene. So be it texturing, lighting, shading, any work compositionally related, and that led me to do essentially everything, with priority always being on look development, texturing, and photoreal lighting. And then I slowly transitioned. I became a CG supervisor, and then for the last 8-9 years, really, I've been VFX supervisor, where I mix my time between managing a house team and also supervising on set. So a lot of my lighting experience actually comes from being on set. So understanding how the actual DP lights the scene, understanding the intricacies of lighting in the context of a live action scene or actual set, and then translating it into photoreal lighting which makes you think about details, what makes the light photoreal, what actual cinematographers go through to achieve a photoreal image on set. And then over the years, I sort of translated that into techniques I use in CG nowadays to kind of drive a photoreal image. And one thing I'll say is that we're discussing lighting in particular, but I actually concentrate on every aspect of what makes image photoreal, from sort of set dressing and think about texturing and shading, and of course lighting, but also camera movement, making sure it's cohesive with the entire scene. So when I approach lighting, to me, I will actually try to encourage in the class to think about that as well, but I think from basics up. So I think about the right model being built, and right sort of texturing being applied, right materials, all of those little things slowly build up to a really sophisticated looking photoreal image. So lighting is a huge aspect of it, but lighting, like a paintbrush, needs a canvas, and that canvas is usually the complexity of the scene and what we get from modeling. And those are the things that we'll also be talking about photoreal lighting, because as lighters we become sort of creative managers, because we get all of the components in the scene dumped on us. So it's our responsibility to make sure that before we even light that scene, we understand that we have enough details to, people come and say, we need to make this look photoreal, but if there's a tree with no leaves on it and it's poorly modeled, let me tell you, it's very difficult to make it look photoreal.
I'm sure you've never had that situation before.
No. So I admit I spend a lot of time. I mean, I love lighting, and I do a lot of look development. I primarily use Maya and Houdini equally well. I use Arnold as a main renderer at work. We use RenderMan for film rendering, but Arnold is my main render. But at home, I use Arnold and Redshift. Just to give you kind of flexibility. I composite in Nuke, and I do a lot of compositing at work. I use Substance Paint in Mari for my texturing. I have to say that even though I have a license on Mari and I use it, I use Substance Paint primarily for all of our photoreal work, because I like the sort of the mentality of, in general, approach to texturing and shading within the context of photorealism. I also do a lot of environment stuff. I will build terrains, or I will use speed tree a lot, because a lot of times I will want to generate things. I will do a lot of photogrammetry, which is a process where we take a lot of photos and we convert them to sort of geometry and photoreal textures. We use a lot of techniques, and I'm hoping that I can, in the process of talking about lighting, as this class sort of develops, we can introduce sort of other aspects of this kind of overall photoreal look development, as I would call it, that would make you guys not only great photoreal lighting and understanding what lighting does, but also be, I would like to say, kind of self-sufficient in giving you scenes things that might not have been given otherwise by some other artist. And to be honest, that will actually help you to stand out in the crowd, especially if you're working in the, depending on the facility you work. I worked at very small places. I have to admit, Jasmine and I, we used to work many years ago together for a visual effects company. So, Mike is here, and but I'm quite familiar with both of them. And Jasmine just actually, I can see, just jumped on as I'm giving her compliments. She's on the right time.
That's like her superpower. She jumps.
It's her superpower. She shows up when the positive things are being said.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's basically sort of a little bit about me, kind of a global thing, But I think I would love to hear, I guess, for me, because the nature of TDU now, and Mike, you can correct me, it's much more organic in the way that we try to make it a more of a personal experience, giving you guys something that is really helpful. And I think your input is important to come up with something that really benefits you guys. I'm seeing some comments. Let me see what's being.
Oh, you're it's just Jasmine.
Oh, it's just Jasmine.
So yeah, so
Jasmine's here for compliments. Yes.
So for the rest of you that are here, you guys can see that there's a comment section down below. And feel free to ask Vadim questions. I'll keep my eye on it. Make sure to ask him anything that you may want to know. So Vadim, you glazed through something about how you transitioned from being having a medical focus to switching over to VFX. So I want to what made you want to get into VFX? Were you like always an artistic kid, or were you always? What was your thing?
It's a good question. That's a good question, Mike.
Yeah, thank you.
Actually, growing up in Russia, I was always into arts. Like I wanted to be a 2D animator, and I've taken painting, and I still actually do a lot of sketching at work. And in visual effects industry, as a supervisor, I always have to do paintings and kind of mock-ups from artists. Mm-hmm. So if I'm asking for a scene to be lit, I often have to do very general descriptions of what my expectation is. So, even though I went in medical field, I always kept connected to storytelling, which I love. And part of the reason I love visual effects and love working with directors and creating photoreal images, it's opportunity to do, in particular, because we're talking about photorealism, I love complementing already where it's most of the time a beautifully told story in terms of cinematography, and having opportunity to give your own sort of imprint on adding something new to it. I love the challenge of mixing something that is absolutely real, which is obviously shot on camera, and understanding all the nuances of how a film reacts to light and everything else, studying that, and then through a lighting exercise, sort of introducing our own elements and blend them then together. I find that a beautiful challenge. It's almost like, I like to think of it as counterfeiting.
Yeah, totally.
If you master that, and for those of you who might say, well, I'm more interested in non-photoreal lighting, and I'm sure, but I will say one thing that I'm sure Jasmine and Mike will agree with me. If you guys understand foundation of photoreal lighting, it is actually not, it's much easier to transition into non-photoreal world, because all you're doing is you're stylizing something that is real anyway. Mm-hmm. By learning sort of aesthetics and sort of real image, it gives you the opportunity to kind of transition into becoming a well-rounded and sort of very flexible lighting artist, where you can jump it in different styles and give you a chance to do anything that is presented in front of you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true, because when you're doing photoreal images, so much of your work is analyzing reference and analyzing the plate itself. And then once you're able to do that with a photoreal image, then you can analyze abstract images and pull the same thing. Or it's like understanding how light works. It all, it all ties together.
And I like how Jasmine is giving me validation and positive reinforcement.
Well, the students listen to Jasmine; they know she knows what she's talking about. So we're idiots. We don't. They don't.
Mike is making a good point, because a lot of how we start photoreal lighting is analysis, and looking at reference, which is one of my favorite parts. Is understanding, what makes that real what makes that image photoreal, what aspects of the environment influence the lighting condition of the scene. What subtle things kind of influence our perception of that lighting. It's thinking about color temperature, thinking about the scale of the scene, and how lighting sort of describes that scale. Because one of the most important things we'll find in photoreal lighting is selling the scale, besides sort of connecting pieces together in terms of light direction and then the shadow color, which a lot of that, actually, I have to be honest, comes in compositing. We tried to get the lighting and photorealism as much as possible, but there's so many components to the actual plate or the image that we're trying to match that it's impossible to fully execute it, partly because there's a color being applied, there's grain on film, there's lens distortion, there's all sorts of things, which still a part of photorealism, and I'm hoping to integrate it into discussion of photorealism, but we always start with kind of generally breaking down the image, understanding the basic components of scale, light direction, color, and sort of deconstructing it, and then layering it with additional elements we might find needed to sell that scale. Movement in the scene, and again, we should be thinking of photorealism as something that is a lot more global and requires more than just lighting. We're starting to talk about photoreal lighting, and we're concentrating on that area. But keep in mind, guys, that a lot of things go into selling a photoreal image. And, you can think of any recent visual effects movies that you've seen, and you realize that the photorealism of any specific shot is dependent on many, many things. And we're just taking that part of photorealism and encapsulating it in terms of conversation about lighting for now.
Have you seen any movies recently that you were kind of wowed by? Is there anything, or any projects, any like commercial work or anything like that? That really kind of caught you off guard?
I can tell you I love the latest. I don't like Avenger movies, to be honest, but the latest Infinity War I thought was beautifully lit, and attention to detail is just really amazing. It's a perfect example of good storytelling where I forget that I'm watching visual effects. And I have to say, I also have seen recently quite a few bad movies. But I will not mention that because they're done by companies that I don't work for.
Yeah, that's right.
But this particular film was great. And, there was a small film that I thought the lighting was beautifully executed, which was Machina. It was done by Double Negative.
Oh, yeah.
It's about this female robot, and it was just beautifully done.
Oh, Ex Machina, that one?
Ex Machina, yes, thank you. What am I thinking?
Yeah,
Foreign and me cannot remember movie titles.
Don't blame it on the foreign. You've been here for a while.
But I spend a lot of time I read publications. I always try to find new things, but I take a lot of pictures, I have to say, partly being on set, but I spend a lot of time doing analysis of images and understanding what makes an image photorealistic. Again, we're talking about lighting here, but as a VFX supervisor, I actually have to think a little bit more globally about layout and all the detail we're putting in, and sort of character design and all sorts of other things that you guys are always welcome to ask me about. But, our attention is going to start with just sort of breaking image down to its basics in terms of just the lighting and potentially sort of materials that get layered on top of the surface. I think those two things do need to go together.
So as a VFX supervisor, as a CG supervisor, I'm sure you've got lighters that work for you, and I'm sure you have to interview people and you review reels and that kind of thing. So one of our big focuses here at TDU, as you know, is getting people's work, getting them assets and getting them work that they can put on their demo reel, and creating something that's of a high enough quality that's going to get them a job. So as a supervisor, as somebody who reviews reels, what is, first off, what's something that you look for, like something that makes you, that you look for in a good reel? And two, if you can have anything that's like cringeworthy that you see and like you're like, oh, I wish they wouldn't have done that.
I'll tell you, camera motion is nice, but it's not important. Like, I see a lot of reels. I have to admit, we get a lot of reels from film studios. So we'll start in that, where people work for film companies. And I have to tell you, I'm less impressed with those. Because most of the time, the amount of people involved in generating that shot. To say that I lit that shot means very little to me.
Yeah, because you never know what people's actual.
You never know. It's like the amount of compositing that happens in film. Meaning, once the shot is lit, if you actually often look at the lighting, it might look like something completely different.
Sure. Yeah.
So
absolutely.
what I always look at is sort of kind of a holistic shot where I know the person did most of the work by themselves, and it becomes obvious. So if as a student, which is what we are talking about here generally, is people kind of picking it up as on this level of kind of strengthening the lighting skills. I look for attention to detail, and it's very easy to say there's a lighting component, but I have to admit I often look to quality of the object in terms of shading that you're lighting. I'm not talking about quality of the model necessarily, because you might not have access to film quality models or whatever the case might be. And I don't need to see 8K 8000 resolution backplates, but I want to see that your attention to detail is there. Meaning, if you're matching something within a plate, you're thinking, what happened to that object once I introduced it in the scene from a lighting perspective? How does that object influence the breakup of the shadows that are already existing? How does it interact, and what does it reflect within that scene? I will literally trace light sources and try to understand how much thinking you've done thinking through the plate, because it's always good to kind of step back and think about what you're lighting and, understand what the scene requires. Be clear on the tone. I want to make sure that you get what the tone of the scene is. So when you're integrating objects, you're not doing it blindly, but you're always keeping the tone of the story and of the shot in mind. And that becomes very obvious when you watch demo reels. Mike, don't get distracted.
I'm sorry, well, two of you guys know this. I just had a baby, and I live in a small New York apartment, and he's awake, and he's not crying at all because my wife's just walking him back and forth off camera here. And so I'm just keeping my eye on them. I'm trying to say thank you with my eyes, but it's not working. So
it's not working, Mike.
So yeah. Okay, sorry.
But when we look for the reel, I look for details.
Yeah.
Okay, I look for original. I'd rather see a few images that are well executed as stills, and I can tell that you understand. Of course, motion is nice, but to be honest, you can tell a lot from a well executed picture, because we are looking for lighters who are comfortable in compositing as well. As a full disclosure. Let's say at MPC, we do look for people who, if we put it on the film project, you have to be aware of compositing process, shading process, understanding look development, how materials react to lighting. So even though you're just a lighter in general, all of our lighters do shading work as well. So it doesn't just end with the lighting process. So I will look for that aspect as well.
And I'm sure, because you said you worked for smaller companies, you worked for larger companies, and I'm sure that the smaller the house, the more responsibility falls on the lighter.
Smaller. I would say I used to do dynamics and fluid simulations, and as Jasmine knows, when we worked together, I did dynamics work.
Yeah.
But it's do few things well. This is, I cannot stress it enough. I know people feel like they want to put volume of things in there. I'd rather have one single image that I look at and I see the person put the effort in.
Yeah.
Than piling volume of sort of mediocre work. Take a few things and do them really well, and that will take you a long way.
Yeah.
If you can add a little bit of a camera motion, if you have a plate, like the plates that we'll be using in this class, I'm collecting now. It's all high resolution that either I shot on the professional camera or I shot on my own camera that it's pro level, that is at high resolution, or we might use stills. And the goal is going to be less about if it's moving or not, because I don't want us to get distracted by that, and more about the content and thinking through the sort of the lighting challenges we're trying to solve.
No, that's great. So to transition, not to talk too much about the classes, just so you guys know, we're still in development on them. We plan on having them come out this year. But like in a short, concise, quick couple sentences, how would you describe your goals for the courses and what the students that are watching here can expect from a Vadim photoreal lighting course or VFX lighting course?
I think number one goal, I always view we're very software independent. We can discuss, and people who join the class, look, I'm flexible working, in Maya, working in Houdini, working in Redshift. Most likely, I think the easiest solution is going to be probably Maya and Arnold, just because it's the most accessible. That's what we use in the studio. Even though I've been using Houdini more, I'm just uncomfortable with either software, and I think it's more accessible. But the goal creatively, what I want to do is to make you guys into thinking artists, which means the priority is for you to take a plate and learn how to think through a visual problem. The class is not necessarily about, this is how you use Arnold. I will certainly point those things out, and we'll make little side videos and whatever you guys need. And I can answer sort of technical questions on how to sort of facilitate using the engine. But I think what I want you to do, what everyone looks for is artists. Technology continuously changes, guys. Like Arnold's version now is better than the version before. We're testing Redshift at work right now. We use RenderMan. We use whatever works for your job. Like it doesn't really matter. But your skill as a lighter and understanding how do you work with area lights, and how do you create a sense of proper scale, or how you texture your light to get sort of better complexity of the scene. Those are the things that we're going to concentrate. So most of the discussion is really about, here's our plate, here's the object we're introducing within this scene. This is how the subject feels like it will be influenced by the lighting in the scene, and at the same time we'll be asking questions. How does the presence of this object now disturbs the content of the plate itself? Because, you know, putting something in the scene, depending on its size, it's not just that, you know, we influencing that object. All of a sudden, all the bounces that we see in the scene, we should think through and see, okay, me putting this car in the shot, what other elements, how does the lighting now is influenced within this kind of synthetic plate? So on the CG side, we actually have to create other elements to introduce them back into the plate itself, so it feels holistic. So it's more of an analysis of lighting and sort of us becoming better lighters in more holistic sense. Not just, this is not like becoming a great Arnold rendering monkey. Okay, that's not the goal here.
Yeah.
And at MPC, we have people whose entire jobs is to oversee renders.
Yeah.
That's not a career path that you want to take. I can tell you.
Right. Which is why you take it to the class.
Yeah.
So you get
That's why you're taking a lighting class. So the goal is to become better artists. The goal is we're going to ask questions. Okay, we're lighting this scene. We're pushing it through lighting. And I think at the end of the exercise, I think we will always ask a question. Okay, what could we add to the shot globally now to make it feel even more photoreal? Maybe that we can introduce some objects that casting shadow on the object that feel like they belong to the scene that is there. If we're putting an object in the forest, it might be nice to throw another tree that casts the shadows on the object, and they feel like they're together to create the illusion that, you know, it all exists holistically. So those types of things we're going to think about. You know.
Okay, so I'm going to jump to some rapid fire questions that I stole from inside the actor's studio for Vadim, just so you guys can see better. And if any of you guys have any Q&As, just go ahead and put them in the comment section, and I'll hop back to those and at the end here. So, Vadim, first up, rapid fire, 10-ish questions. What's your favorite word?
That's not really rapid. Ooh, that's tough. I would say delicious.
Delicious. What's your least favorite word?
Oh, I can't say it on the...
That's yeah, it's so bad you can't even say it out loud.
Yeah, I get so bad I can't even say it.
Okay, what turns you on, either creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Creatively, I have to say people, and I'm working with this German composer right now who is a embodiment of that. People who are on the same creative wavelength as I am, who passionate about the project that we're working on and continuously bringing something beyond what is it being asked for. That's a huge sort of...
That's perfect. Yeah, that's great. That's amazing. Okay, so what is your favorite curse word?
Ooh. It's in Russian. I can't say it.
All right, that's fine. It's fine. We got a lot of censored things. Okay, which profession, other than your own, other than VFX supervisor, would you like to attempt?
Cinematographer. I think if I wasn't doing this, I think I would be a cinematographer, yes.
Which profession would you hate?
What I hate? Banking.
And medicine, apparently.
No, medicine, I probably would have.
You'd have been fine. You'd have been all right.
Who knows?
Okay, final question. If you could have worked on any one film or project in history, what would it be and why?
It's funny. I actually had this conversation with someone the other day. I like films that are story-driven, that inspire me. Surprisingly, Star Wars wouldn't necessarily be that film. I would say films that Christopher Nolan does, where like Inception or Ex Machina, you know, that type of film. Like independent movies with the interesting storyline where visual effects just sort of complements it. It's invisible. And, you know, I worked on like a Woody Allen movie many years ago, and that was sort of a good experience.
Which one? Which one did you work on?
Vicky Cristina Barcelona.
Oh yeah, it's a great movie. I love that movie.
Yeah. But those are the films I like. I find when the movie is too, I'm working with someone who just finished being a supervisor on Aquaman, which is not a very good movie, and we worked on it.
I'm never gonna say. I actually haven't seen Aquaman yet. I don't know.
But I'll tell you, that's not the movie I would want to get involved. It's like it's a diarrhea of visual effects, and I don't. That's not me. And I've done like visual effects heavy shots, but
yeah. So so Victor asks, will image-based lighting chrome ball techniques be discussed in your course?
Yeah, I actually use I use HDRIs, but I that's something I want to discuss in particular because I think there's a tendency to abuse that in a lot of ways. We absolutely use image-based lighting in all of our visual effects work, but the way we use it requires a lot of balancing and proper setup for that HDRI to actually be useful. We don't grab a sphere and just kind of a dome light and throw it in. I try to be a little bit more specific. And we can actually certainly discuss that. It's important. In terms of chrome ball, I actually find chrome ball techniques be more useful because they go through the same color process as the rest of the footage. And a lot of lighting I do, I actually, to be honest, I will take the plate, and depending, we will talk a little bit about color space, but I will actually construct a simple version of my set and project the plate and do a little bit of lighting from the plate itself. Because the color actually gives me a lot of information already, and it goes through the same color process. And so, when we're talking about image-based lighting, I kind of include set projections as an important part of the process. And, but it depends on the shot, to be honest. Like on the exterior shots, I used a lot of HDRIs because it's a more straightforward way. But once we get into interior or I have to shape something, it requires a little bit more of a careful approach in terms of lighting of the scene using HDRIs. That's a good question. Yeah,
that's great. All right, and like we said, guys, Vadim's around for a while. If you have questions, feel free to post them in the Facebook group. Vadim's on there, or you can email us, and we'll figure it out. But Vadim, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us tonight. There's a feature on this. I haven't used that, so I want to thank Vadim Turchin, and I am Michael Tanzillo. And I want to thank you guys so much for joining us tonight.
So, Mike, if I wanted to stay, you said to stay for questions. Am I staying on this?
No, we're good. That was all the questions.
Oh, okay.
So so we're good for now. But like I said, guys, if you have more questions, please just let us know. We'll be happy to get in touch with you. Vadim, thank you so much again. And
thank you guys.
There's going to be more announcements. And there's going to be more announcements about the VFX lighting coming soon. There's going to be more announcements. I'm going to do another one of these next Wednesday. We're probably going to be discussing the art of Fan Ho, which is one of my favorite photographers of all time. And then we'll go from there. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Monica and Victor. Both say thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Have a good night. Bye.